coming to get you, Barbara. They're coming for you, Barbara. Look, there comes one of them now.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Movie Breakdown. And yes, once again, this failed to be a weekly show. And so let's go through the normal opening ritual where I apologize that we've missed a few weeks of the podcast. And I mourn how this podcast at one time was a weekly show. For over a decade, we were able to post an episode almost every single week. And that was during a time where there was two hosts, and we also reviewed movies every single week. And that is not the case because I continue my impressive streak of not reviewing any movies in 2025, despite the fact that I said I wanted to have a best of the year show, which is going to be really hard with 3 months left, and I haven't even seen any of the movies yet. So it may not be the most impressive list of all time, that is for sure. And like I have said a few times, a big reason why this podcast hasn't been consistent, a big reason why Beyond the Balcony has not had sort of movie reviews, a lot of the pop culture writing, is my neurodivergence. And I'm not making an excuse here. I'm doing an explanation. And a big reason is just almost 47 years of my life, I wasn't aware that my mind was wired differently. And for 47 years, I was feeling shame that I wasn't normal. And I was trying to do whatever I can to, this is what a normal person is supposed to do. And I went through university and I landed some great writing gigs, and I've had many jobs, and I would say there is throughout my life, I have definitely had a lot of successes and things I've been proud of, but I always felt like I was working a little harder, or things that were easy for everyone else was unbearable for me. And I know I've mentioned this stuff before on the podcast, so maybe you've already turned it off or you have fallen asleep, but I mention this because I am realizing through talking to a therapist and my own research that I have hit autistic burnout. Something that can last for months or it can last for years. This idea that I was pushing against my brain for so long that it has kind of shut down on me, and that is why I've had sort of the feelings of no energy and depression and being more irritable and maybe being angry and be more in seclusion. And I think that's also part of the reason why, in some ways, I have been scared to go back to the movie theater or be around people, and just why I have had a hard time with just getting my career rolling again. And me saying that, I do want to mention that as I recently put on my Beyond the Balcony site, beyondthebalcony.com, I am writing as a film critic and a columnist for the Video Librarian now. So, I mean, it's not a huge paying gig. It's definitely not a full-time job, but it's at least some work. It's a step, and I'm continuing to talk to some other agencies and stuff. And so I'm hoping through therapy and learning tools and strategies, I will be able to effectively be able to get work again and be effective career-wise, and sort of get back in a place where I'm making a living and helping to support my family, because that's been a big thing too, is through the last few years when I've hit through the depression and sort of had this crash and this burnout, I have not been pulling my weight when it comes to the finances. And so in some ways, my family is in a tight and tough spot. That's what a TIFE is. That's tight and tough. And so that's also been a burden on me. And so I have been thankful to the amazing readers and listeners through the years that have donated some money through PayPal and helped that way. And so I definitely, for people who know for potential leads for work, or if you yourself are wanting someone to create creative, imaginative copy for your social media or your site to help sort of engage with your customers and grow your brand, that's something I have done. I would love to potentially talk to you about. Or I can, obviously I've written about neurodivergence, mental health, parenting, pop culture. You can also mix all that all up into one interesting article if you're an editor. And I've also am completely open to writing a personalized short story, which could be a fantastic gift that you would give to sort of a loved one. And or even I've recently wrote some plays for a vocational Bible school in the summer, and it was a huge hit and people like them quite a bit. So I'd also be open if there's something like that where you would want me to write a script for a potential small little script that you can do for your conference or other programs that you have in place. And obviously, if you've appreciated this podcast, if you've appreciated the site, another way you can always help again is my PayPal account. And over on Beyond the Balcony, I've had some links that you can find through there if that's something that you're interested in doing as well. But that's not what this podcast is about. I just wanted to start off of explaining sort of some of the things that I've realized of, and I think I have talked a bit about this in recent episodes too, but just part of the reason why I know this podcast and a lot of things are just not rolling, those roadblocks I think have come from sort of a burnout and just trying to figure out what it is that I could handle at this point, and trying to figure out how to effectively use my autism and my ADHD in sort of conserving my energy and being in a place where I can be successful. So using my strengths and using my brain in a way where I can keep up the energy, but also have a successful career and reach my dreams. And most important to me is to help and support my family, which right now I realize is through freelance work and doing sort of copywriting for different companies and writing for different magazines, because I'm not of any kind of delusion that Beyond the Balcony or the movie Breakdown is going to take off at any huge level in like the next month, especially, when I'm not posting on a regular basis. But one of the reasons that I wanted to sort of mention my neurodivergence again is that I want to sort of talk today on this podcast about sort of how movies is connected to my neurodivergence. No, I'm not blaming movies on causing me to be neurodivergent. I mean, the movies are not Tylenol after all. But I do think that the way that I have viewed movies, talked about movies, connected with movies is definitely been connected to also with me being a neurodivergent person. And the first one that I can really think about is the fact, and it's me kind of looking back and realizing now, is how much as a young kid who was unaware that he was autistic, but did think he was kind of weird and didn't quite fit in, how much I watched movies in some ways to mimic the characters and to sort of understand, this is how you're supposed to behave. This is how you're supposed to engage with people. This is what school looks like. This is what the workplace looks like. This is what a young boy looks like. He's supposed to go out, hop on his bike and ride to the nearest forest and try to build a fort. This is how you're supposed to make friends in the real world, because these are what the movies are showing me. And this wasn't just as a kid. Like, I remember watching a lot of high school movies throughout high school, trying to sort of figure out, oh, this is how you interact with people. This is sort of how you are to be a friend. This is what a friend is like. This is what a good student is like. And I'm not saying that that you have to be neurodivergent to sort of have kind of movies to be on your personality, but I definitely feel for me it was very much of that idea of when you're autistic, you don't quite have the manual. You feel like there is a game, but your instruction manual was lost. You don't quite know how to interact in the real world. And I remember as a kid doing a lot of people watching and looking at, because I was the oldest in my family, I didn't have an older sibling to mimic, and so I would do a lot of watching the other students and my peers. And I remember so many times them yelling at me of like, why are you staring at me? What are you looking at? And and to me, I didn't really even understand it. Like, I'm not staring. I'm trying to sort of figure things out. I'm just watching. But that was another thing I had to learn is, you can't look at one person for too long, because then they get creeped out. And so because I couldn't necessarily do that without getting picked on and bullied even more for, being the weird kid who stares, I used movies a lot to sort of figure out how, sort of trying to figure out what are the rules and what are how greetings are supposed to be done, and what are the things that sort of a successful person is. What are the things that we're supposed to be going after? Oh yeah, you need to get a girlfriend, and you have to do some big heroic feat, and then that will bring you all these friends. But even more so, it is sort of learning the type of dialogue and the type of proper hobbies. And I remember there was a girl that I dated for a very, very short time. And at that point, I still hadn't even figured out what my feelings were for her. And then she broke up with me. And I think because I had seen so many of these kind of teen movies, these high school movies, I almost word for word were sort of using the words of like the broken-hearted guy who was getting dropped by the girl. And I was almost in a way kind of performing what I thought I was supposed to act out after a breakup. And it was this idea that I realized that I think I'm supposed to be brokenhearted. I'm supposed to take this hard. I'm supposed to say, no, I don't need a ride home, and take the long walk home with my head down. And I'm supposed to say these words of like, oh, is it me? Like, what is it that I did to make this wrong? I mean, like, we'd only been together for maybe 2 weeks at the most. And like I said, I'm not even, my memory is that there wasn't this huge kind of emotional connection to her. She would have been like my first kind of real girlfriend. Maybe even 2 weeks is not real. But again, like I said, my responses were almost from what I'd seen in the movies. And my feelings of heartbreak were what I felt like I was supposed to be heartbroken. I was supposed to be hurt. And I'm not sure if this is necessarily making a lot of sense to a lot of my listeners, or if you're just like, this is so bizarre. But this is a bit of the autistic experience, is that idea sometimes of we don't quite always understand our emotions. Like we feel upset, but we're not quite sure. Are we angry? Are we sad? Is it this we forgot to eat all day? And also sometimes not really sure of what are the social rules and the etiquette, which is often why so many autistic people come off as rude or heartless or jerks is because of sometimes they can be more blunt than they should be. And it's that idea of sometimes you're not sure how you're supposed to respond. And so I just think of that moment. It was down the basement of a church where she was broken up with me. And I don't think I got teary-eyed, but I remember sort of to her being like, well, what can we do to make this work? Like, why have you decided to let me go? And it was all sort of these responses that I felt like I needed to do because it's what I saw on the big screen. And like I said, that I was supposed to sort of be all down and out when we go upstairs. And then, no, don't give me a ride home. And I wander home. And a lot of it was, I felt like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, right? This is how I'm supposed to feel. And so it's looking back and it's interesting of how much sometimes my response to things or the way I've interacted or what I thought was important in my teen years or early adulthood was based off of this is what I saw on the big screen, so this is what I'm supposed to do. And another thing that sort of was really big, especially as a kid for me, what I attached to were the movies that had sort of the outsiders. The person who was kind of the loser, but in the end triumphs. And looking now, it's obvious why those movies always resonated with me so much was because of the fact that I never really felt like I fit in. Like I had a best friend who, surprisingly enough, now I've learned is also now a late diagnosed person with autism and ADHD. So it's funny how that happens, and now I can understand why he's probably my longest friend and why we connected. Because there's probably a bit of both of us feeling like we didn't quite fit into this world. And I've confessed before how I was teased and bullied in elementary school, and then even high school. Never quite felt like sort of I fit in. And there was often sort of that idea of trying to just struggling to kind of navigate and understand the world, and things never always kind of feeling quite real. I mean, even I feel like there was bits of imposter syndrome of once I got married and once I became sort of a parent, wondering like, am I doing this right? Is this what I'm supposed to do? Do I really deserve to be in this position? And I think, again, that a lot of that comes from sort of that neurodivergent part of my brain. But taking back as a kid of why I was so much into the outsider was because myself, I felt like an outsider. And so I connected to the Goonies, and I connected to sort of, Luke Skywalker left on this planet with where he feels like he has no future, but also now he goes into a great adventure because there was that hope for me that I'm an outsider, but one day maybe I could be the hero. I mean, I remember loving the Annie musical. Again, she was an orphan. She felt unloved, but in the end, she's kind of a great hero. Marty McFly is told that he's a loser, but then he goes back into the future, and it all. Well, he doesn't go back in the future. The movie he's in is called Back to the Future. He goes to the past, and then he wants to get back to 1985. But my big thing with movies, I mean, I liked a huge swath of movies, sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, but there was always sort of that attachment to the person who was the outsider. I felt that, and so those movies, those would kind of almost be sort of my special interest. I'd watch them over and over because I connect with the idea of like, okay, maybe it's all right to not always be the coolest person. Maybe it's all right to feel a little bit left out, because look at these Goonies. Their whole sort of they define themselves as the Goonies, as sort of the people who are not like the rich upper class. And so those were sort of the pictures that meant something to me. One movie that I remember rewatching so much was Lucas, starring Corey Haim. And he liked collecting bugs, and he had a big crush on sort of a girl who ended up sort of becoming a cheerleader, and because she was attractive, played by, I think her name was Carrie Green Russell, and ended up dating the Charlie Sheen character. And so poor Lucas would get his heart broken. But Lucas was one, he was picked on by the other football players. He never quite fit in because he was the smallest, and he had weird interests. And so I connected with Lucas, even though, like, I remember as a kid, like, well, I'm definitely not as smart as him. I don't know as many bugs as he does, and I'm not someone who's going to be fast-tracked through school because of my super intelligence. But I did connect with sort of Lucas being teased for not being athletic and not quite being like all the other kids. And then, of course, Lucas gets his big moment where he's on the football field and he catches the ball and gets tackled, and then he goes back to school and he gets the slow clap, and he gets his moment. And I think that's something I always attached to, is that I'm the outsider, but hey, you can finally have your moment. But one area where I think the outsider narrative maybe was dangerous for someone who was neurodivergent. So neurodivergent being, especially like when you're autistic and you've got your special interests, you dive in. And so I was diving into these movies. I think one problem with a lot of these pictures, and this is something I really have been trying to pitch around to different magazines, because I think there's a great story idea here, and it's something I want to write about. And I think if it doesn't get accepted, I'll write it on Beyond the Balcony. But the problem is Hollywood's outsider has always been either the outsider is someone who is sort of that idea of, he's on the motorcycle and he's got the leather jacket and he's an outsider, but he really is kind of cool. He's a badass. Or the outsider of the ones I've mentioned, where, like, think of something with Back to the Future, where Marty has his dad, George McFly, who is definitely kind of nerdy and he gets picked on. He's a bit of a loser. But when the movie ends, George McFly is now all of a sudden a best-selling author. And he doesn't even really have the dorky laugh anymore. And he's now almost become cool. And I think a lot of these outsider narratives, if you have someone where at the beginning, if they seem like a dork or quirky or don't quite fit in the world, in the end, they prove actually they are cool and they do have this special talent. And now the success is when they've been accepted by the group and they are now the cool person, and they lose a lot of sort of their nerdy attributes and they become, in quotes, sort of normal. They've now been accepted by society. Like even Teen Wolf, this idea of like he's turned to a wolf, again, sort of almost like an allegory of something that makes you different, makes you not quite fit in or feel like you're like everyone else. He's able to kind of become cool by the end of the movie. And that was the one, and especially with sort of the Harry Potter and the Star Wars thing for sure, where Luke's got the Force and Harry Potter ends up being the best at Quidditch. I fly around in a broom and score stuff. But the idea is that they end up becoming cool at the end. And it's very rare that there's movies where they delve into someone who is nerdy or maybe a little bit neurodivergent-coded, which I think in some ways George McFly is. Someone who's got these tics, has these routines, things have to be a certain way. It's very rare that they let someone be like that at the beginning of the movie, and then at the end that they remain that way, but there's still this sense of success. There's still this sense of closure, but they didn't have to change who they are. So many of these movies, it seems like the transformation has to be that they sort of lose their geekiness in order to truly have kind of victory at the end. And I mean, there are exceptions. There's so many people who told me I would love Napoleon Dynamite, and I was not a fan, but I will say that one of the things to praise about Napoleon Dynamite is he is still himself when that movie ends. When he does his nerdy dance and gets a response from the assembly, he's still Napoleon Dynamite, who he was at the beginning. He still has his quirks, his weirdness, his responses, his tics. It's still there. And Emilia, the French film, which a lot of people say that her character is likely autistic, she sort of remains who she is from the beginning to the end. And I'm not against a character arc. I'm definitely for someone learning and growing. It's just now looking back as sort of a film critic, especially now someone who's autistic, and some characters that maybe they aren't outright autistic or ADHD, but they're coded a bit. Sort of when they make themselves a little bit that outsider, that little bit of weirdness, it's almost like you haven't achieved victory until you eliminate that part, and now you become cool and normal. And I think that part is almost dangerous, and so it is worthy praising those movies where the character arc is maybe learning compassion or empathy for someone, or you can sort of reach success, but you can still be yourself. All those little quirks, those things that made you nerdy, that's not a bad thing. And so I think there is something worth praising movies where the person keeps that. And that's just my sort of observation of sort of a person who definitely thinks about movies way too much. That is something I think that is worth kind of exploring and analyzing and criticizing sort of in movies. But I love movies. And I think one thing as a neurodivergent person, I have learned that I definitely have my sensory overload, and like I go to a wedding, and as much as it's nice to see people again, I find it very hard to talk or focus because of the blaring music and the clashing plates and just so much happening. Same with restaurants. I mean, going to restaurants with my family is a nice thing, but sometimes it can be a little overwhelming with the lights and the smells and the sounds. But it's interesting that I would say one of my happy places, one of my safe places is the movie theater. Now, I have confessed I haven't gone even once this year. And I think in some ways that's probably been a detriment. I do have some movie passes. So even though I have no money, I do have some movie passes, some free movie passes that I can use. And so I can go to the theater and see some movies and not put a strain on that budget that does not exist. And I could start reviewing some new movies again. And I think in some ways that may be part of my therapy, because movies is definitely one of my special interests. It's one of those things, that I hyper focus and that I've loved all my life, storytelling, movies. And when I go to movies, that's one area where, like, I usually do sit in a place where I'm not surrounded by people. I like kind of staying in that little corner where it could be my little safe place. But I do like the communal experience. I do like hearing the people laugh and gasp and connect. And it's one of those things where I don't have to worry about communicating or talking to people, but I can still feel that shared experience of being a part of a community. We just all have to sit, look at that big screen, and just be ourselves, just enjoy, just be swept into that different world. And it's something that I have always deeply loved. I mean, one of my biggest fears of the current state of the movie business is that Brantford loses a movie theater. I mean, right now it's a 10-minute walk from my house. And my deep hope is that Brantford never loses a movie theater, and that I can still continue to go there. And it's definitely been a place where I have seen amazing stories and felt so many different emotions. And it's sort of 2 hours where I could be lost, or nowadays 3.5 hours where I could be lost, and just sort of connect with the audience and enjoy this movie with all the other moviegoers, but not have to worry about scripting or what I'm going to say. I just need to be lost with them in the world of movies. And speaking of special interests, I would definitely say that movies has been one. At certain times, it's been like specific type of movies for sure. Like I was all in and obsessed with Indiana Jones, and as I mentioned, Goonies and The Karate Kid, and definitely Star Wars. Star Wars has been an everlasting kind of obsession since the first day I ever seen it. But I think with neurodivergence, where it's important to sort of be able to have those obsessions, and that's all you want to talk about and think about. One of the things that's made movies such a great special interest is that there is so much to analyze, and there is so much to sort of see out on that screen, and my ability to sort of that pattern seeking behavior of autism and ADHD, and that sort of seeing things that maybe not everyone usually does, and being able to make those kind of leaps and connections to your own life and your own feelings, and connections of like kind of grasping themes that maybe even the creator himself didn't intend, but you can see there. It has all of that. Being able to sort of seek out what are my strengths as being neurodivergent has been a huge reason why I've been attached to movies, and it's allowed me to sort of kind of do with special interests. It's often something you always want to talk about and you want to go deep on. And one of the great things of movies being that it's allowed me to do this podcast. I realize now that probably a big reason why I started this podcast in 2013 is it allowed me to just obsessively analyze and dive deep into a movie with all its themes and nuances and things I got out of without boring my wife to death. I can now just do it into a microphone, talk about it with Scott, and then if people want to listen to it, that'd be great. And luckily, thousands of people want to listen to it, which is awesome. And thank you. And I appreciate that. But I think that's one of the things that has been great about movies is the fact that it has allowed my special interest then to lead to other things like the podcast and then becoming a film critic. Did film reviews right now for the Video Librarian, of course, for my site, Buddy TV, Collective Publishing, Roadrunner, Movie Web, different places throughout the years that I've wrote for. I've been able to analyze and dive deep into movies and find, like I said, like these different patterns and these different sort of insights in this picture because of the way my brain is. I love just kind of really digging in into why did they use this shot? Why are they using these colors? What is the another broader message of this movie? All that kind of geekiness that I love to do. And so movies allowed sort of the things I like to do. Like I said, that analysis, that pattern seeking, that sort of deeper thinking. That is, the movies open that door, and just the joy of sort of being able to have a podcast and film criticism allowed me to sort of do my oversharing, but to an audience rather than to a person whose eyes are glazed over in a party, which has happened a lot, and which is probably why I learned I needed to find new outlets, because all I wanted to do was talk about movies at, that 3-year-old kid's birthday party or or at someone's wedding or right before we're supposed to go on stage. So there's that. And so that's another thing. And this now also leads me to another aspect where I feel my neurodivergence has been connected to movies. And it's sort of, one, movies has sparked my own creativity, my own imagination. I've talked before about how Star Wars was an impetus to me sort of becoming a writer and creating stories, and how often I would just go in the backyard and play these imaginary games by myself, but then I'd have a notebook and start writing my own versions of stories. And so again, sort of that obsession side, but it's also been really important as a way of the imagination, the storytelling, the ideas that I get from movies has been huge in a way of sort of doing self-therapy and stimming and calming and regulating me and allowing me to sort of process the world a bit. When things get too much, I will hide in a room and I will just sort of start daydreaming and often thinking about sort of movies and scenes, or taking an idea of something like Goonies and then creating sort of my own Goonies in my head. And sometimes that leads to writing a story, but other times it's me in a room sort of daydreaming. And there's often this talk of, with like autistic people, our inner self, our thoughts, our imaginations, the world that we create in our head is often more vivid and more rewarding than the real world, because we actually have autonomy, we actually have control. And so there's many times, I think I've confessed on this podcast, where I would be on my own and I would, like, I've talked to myself and I would script, but there is times where I would act out imaginary scenes, and they're either imaginary scenes from movies, or they're sort of inspired from movies and imaginative play. And this was something I did a lot as a kid, but it's something I still do as an adult, and it helps sort of stimulate my creativity and get the process going. And I feel like all these amazing movies I've seen over the years has helped me have this huge bank of different worlds that I can go to and sort of help my own kind of form of self-therapy and soothing. And I'm not sure if this podcast, this episode, had any value whatsoever for any of you. And even if maybe you are autistic, or you're neurodivergent, and maybe you can relate to this, or maybe you can't. Maybe you're like, wow, Chris, you're out there, even for me. I shouldn't say that, but I hope in some ways this meant something for you. It at least gave you a window into sort of who I am and what movies has meant to me. And fingers crossed that we've got an episode next week. And maybe I'll finally, it's the biggest running gag of the year, maybe I'll have a review for Walter Gromit, Vengeance Most Foul, or something else that came out in 2025. Maybe. If you want to give me your thoughts on this episode, or things you'd like to see in future episodes, or whatever, you can do that by contacting me at themoviebreakdown@gmail.com. And since it's just me, you can also just go to my personal site, my personal email, christopher.d.spicer@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at moviebreakdown1. We have a Facebook page at the Movie Breakdown, so feel free to go to those places as well. Please follow us on the social media. It helps then our sort of the algorithms. If the more followers we have and the more engagement that there is, then the more people will see it, and then we can lead them to this show. And as always, please subscribe and rate us on Spreaker, Spotify, Castbox, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Because once again, those algorithms, the more people who rate and subscribe, the more we can grow. And another way you can help out the podcast is listen to us on the Spreaker app, because that means just a little extra bit of money goes our way if you use the app. So that'd be awesome. Please share us on social media and all those things. And of course, there is Beyond the Balcony, my pop culture site. And I am writing something on there every day, or at least posting something on there every day, even if it's not movie reviews. I do announce that I'm now writing for Video Librarian, and I post a link to the first movie I review, which is a documentary, The Route from China to America. I look at a video that talks about why autistic people tend to be drained by easy things. And so I sort of share, there's a video about these 5 things, and then I talk about those 5 things of how they drain me and sort of my own personal anecdotes. I write a little bit about different forms of ADHD and autistic experience on the site. That's a big thing I've been writing about recently. People have appreciated, but I do want to to bring it back to movies as well very soon. I also talked about Sweet Pickles, which was a book series I absolutely loved as a kid. And if you don't know what Sweet Pickles is, go over on Beyond the Balcony. It's a recent article you can check out, and we can all learn and love Sweet Pickles together. But thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Movie Breakdown. Hopefully there'll be an episode again next week. I'm Christopher Spicer, and have a great week at the movies.